This March is going to be absolute madness. We have a bunch of different energetic factors combining together this month. Individually, each of these already is quite significant. Combined together though, this looks to be quite explosive and it seems to be ramping up towards the end of the month. Now we're already seeing previews of this March madness. For example, we've been seeing massive volatility in the cryptocurrency markets over the past few days. We've had increasing volatility in the traditional financial markets for months now. We all saw that crazy showdown that occurred in the Oval Office, and we've been having these wild weather patterns all across the globe for the past few weeks, and that looks likely to continue. The reason why is we have solar maximum at this moment in time. So the magnetic field of the sun itself is mid-flip, and therefore it's at its most chaotic and energetic, and it is pumping a ton of energy into the Earth energy system. Then on top of that, we have Equinox this month. And so this is a special energetic configuration that the Earth moves into because of its orbital alignment with the sun, creating greater ionospheric volatility. Also, stronger geomagnetic storms are more common around the equinoxes. So we have that effect as well. And then we have some planetary resonances. We have 4 Cazimis this March. We also have 2 separate retrogrades. We have Venus and Mercury retrograde. We also have eclipses. So we will have a total lunar eclipse on the 14th and then a partial solar eclipse on the 29th of March. And then on the 23rd and the 24th of March, we have critical planetary geometry, unlike anything that we've seen for a long time. So in today's video, I'll break down everything that's occurring so you are prepared for the month ahead. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, I'm your space weatherman, Stefan Burns, and that is what we discuss on this channel. We look at what's happening energetically on Earth by examining Earth geologic and geophysical events, but also the sun, its solar activity, and also the wider solar system and cosmos, what's happening with the planets and more. So if you like the sound of that, then please subscribe. Also, a quick announcement before we start, I'll be holding a sale on my website, wildfreeorganic.com/store for the entire month of March. Using the code March Madness, you can get 5% off any of my products. For example, spirituality, which is amazing for helping you to enhance your dreams, to sleep better. Herb coffee, great at enhancing your focus and creativity, and excellent nootropic. Also, for example, my all natural earthing shoes, completely made out of leather, the best earthing shoes on the market. So if you'd like to pick up any of these products for a discount, now is the time using the code March Madness, all one word, for 5% off. Now let us look at our sun to begin, because this is the largest energetic factor that has been active for a while now, but will continue to be active for this month. We've been seeing sunspot numbers steadily on an uptrend if you look at the long-term moving averages. And so that may continue for March. And this is also going to be occurring while we have equinox and eclipse season. So there's a bunch of other energies in the background as well. Here we have our last Carrington rotation of the sun. Basically, we're looking at the entire month of February. You see all the activity that is distributed out across the surface. Some areas there which don't have as many sunspots, but then there are other areas that have a ton of activity. We discussed this in the beginning of February. And so right now we are in a period where sunspots are climbing back over 150 as I'm filming this video. And we have a whole bunch of activity that's going to be rotating in over the next few days. And so this is going to really get March started. But then of course it takes 28 days for the sun to rotate. Basically, it's a little bit longer at the poles. And so we are going to get these rhythms and these pulses of solar activity. And it looks like around March 20th to the 30th is when we're going to have another big swing up of solar activity based on the placement of sunspots right now on the sun, where they are, and the rotation period of the sun. But during solar maximum, you have more overall energy output from the sun. Total solar irradiance is higher. It goes from about 1,360 watts per square meter up to about 1,364 watts per square meter as measured at Earth. But during solar maximum, you have certain frequencies of light that go up dramatically in strength, multiple orders of magnitude. For example, the extreme ultraviolet and X-ray part of the light spectrum go up significantly. Also, the radio frequency part of the light spectrum also bumps up during solar maximum. And so we have those effects as well. And when you have more extreme ultraviolet light and X-ray light that charges the ionosphere, creates a stronger plasma in our upper atmosphere, and this can lead to stronger weather systems and also more powerful geomagnetic storms. And another very important energetic event that occurs this month is the March equinox on the 21st, meaning that there will be equal amounts of light and dark across the entire planet around that time. This is very important for a few reasons. First and foremost, we just look at the history and at ancient civilizations for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. We have looked at these equinoxes and these solstices as very important moments in time, charged with very special archetypal energies. So much so that massive megalithic structures were built across the entire globe to precisely track these moments in time, these special events involving the sun. So there's some sort of background resonant energy associated with the equinoxes and the solstices first and foremost. Now we can also look at the science of the equinox to understand how this influences our energy here on Earth. So here we have the Earth. You see it has its tilt axis here. You see it spinning really rapidly. And here is its orbit denoted by this blue line right there. These white orbs that are flying by are the specific equinox and solstice points. And so we see that the Earth is basically moving through its orbit and passing those specific points. You will also see the sunlight that's hitting the Earth right here. So here's the equinox. Here we have northern hemisphere solstice, that's June. Here we have December solstice right there, and then we have equinox right there. So when you have the solstices, you have a lot more light radiation either hitting the southern hemisphere or the northern hemisphere. And it's light radiation that causes ionization of the ionosphere, specifically those higher frequencies that I mentioned like extreme ultraviolet and X-ray. And so during, for example, June, the northern hemisphere will have a lot more ionization of its ionosphere, whereas during December, right here, you'll have a lot more light radiation causing greater ionization in the southern hemisphere. During the equinox, though, you have this equal light budget across the entire globe. And so it's this inflection point going from greatest ionization in the southern hemisphere to greatest ionization in the northern hemisphere. That's specifically the March equinox. And when you have that occurring, you have greater ionospheric volatility because now you have more and more parts of the southern hemisphere basically moving out of light very rapidly, and the northern hemisphere is gaining light very rapidly as well. And that in general predisposes the Earth to greater geomagnetic storms because of this enhanced ionospheric volatility. The ionosphere is the main mediator of a geomagnetic storm occurring on Earth as we measure it. So you have a solar storm impact. That does a whole bunch of things to the magnetosphere and also the plastosphere. But specifically, it is the electric currents of the ionosphere that are generated that generate these really big swings in the magnetic field that we observe at the surface. And if those magnetic field swings are big enough, they can induce very powerful geomagnetically induced currents in anything that's conductive. So for example, a transmission line. And if you have really powerful ionospheric currents, then you have these really powerful geomagnetically induced currents at the surface, and that can cause things like a power grid failure. And we've had examples of that occur. For example, 1989, and then there's been some recent examples actually this year and also back in 2024. Cuba had some power outages. Chile just had some power outages. We don't know 100% if that's attributed to solar maximum, but it seems likely that it contributed to some degree, adding just more stress to these technological systems. And so that is already occurring because of solar maximum, but you have the equinox and you have this great change in the ionosphere right at that moment in time. And in addition to that effect, we also have what's known as the Russell-McFerrin effect, which is also another amplifier on making geomagnetic storms more powerful. And so during the Russell-McFerrin effect, you have a specific alignment between the solar wind and Earth's magnetic field because of this tilt axis. Again, this is 23.5 degrees. And so right at the equinox, you have Earth's magnetic field preferentially connecting to the solar wind much easier for both hemispheres. So during the solstice, you have this tilt angle like this. And so, for example, during the summer solstice in June, you can have the magnetic field of the solar wind connect really easily for the northern hemisphere, but then the southern hemisphere will be pointed away. If I zoom forward a little bit, you can see that. It's now pointed away from the solar wind. But if you have both of them aligned tangent to the solar wind effectively, you can have particles flow in really easily to both hemispheres, creating just in general greater geomagnetic volatility. And then if you have certain solar wind configurations, you can also then enhance that geomagnetic volatility that we experience. And we see that during the equinoxes, we have in general stronger geomagnetic storms, much greater electron and ion precipitation into the ionosphere in the first place. And in general, all that just creates this greater energy volatility across the entire planet. And in addition to the equinoxes, we also have the eclipses this March. And this is based on the moon and its orbit around the Earth and the position of the lunar nodes. And so there's an 18.6-year cycle for the position of these lunar nodes. And so we have eclipses throughout all parts of the year, depending on where they are. And right now they happen to be along this equinox axis. And so we will have a total lunar eclipse on March 14th, when the moon will pass into its full position, and right at that moment it will be aligned with the Earth-Sun ecliptic plane. Therefore, it will get cast into the shadow of the Earth itself, and only the red wavelengths of light are able to pierce through and then illuminate the moon for about a few hours. This total lunar eclipse on March 14th will be visible from all of the Americas and then also on regions on both sides. So the Atlantic and then also stretching into the Pacific, Hawaii, even New Zealand will see this total lunar eclipse. Then after that, we have the partial solar eclipse. So the moon will continue to rotate through its orbit, and on March 29th, it'll pass into a new moon phase, and that'll happen to be aligned exactly with that ecliptic plane. And so it's going to go and move right in front of the sun. And as one of the great coincidences of the universe, the moon happens to be basically the exact same apparent size as the sun as viewed from Earth. So this really remarkable effect occurs where you can have the moon completely block the sun. That's a total solar eclipse. A partial is where it's slightly misaligned from that ecliptic plane, and so it blocks most of the sun, but not all of it. That's what we have coming up on March 29th. And so these eclipses, they move throughout the year, and we've been having them a few years ago, for example, in the summer, but they've been getting closer and closer to spring and fall, and now they are exactly aligned with the equinox, because March 14th, March 29th, you put the equinox right in the center of that, right? So we have these energetic events which are already very, very impactful because of the more aligned gravitational vectors, for example, and a full moon already is an energy climax moment. But then you also, for example, can look at, again, ancient civilizations and cultures, and they thought eclipses were extremely impactful and important. So much so that if you go to Stonehenge, not only does it track the position of equinox and solstice, it's also an eclipse calculator. So this is tremendously advanced knowledge of astronomy thousands and thousands of years ago, and they didn't track this stuff for no reason. So we have the eclipses also this month with the lunar eclipse and then the solar eclipse on both sides of the equinox. And guess what? Right during that equinox is when we have a double Cazimis, basically. Let's talk about these 4 planetary Cazimis that we have coming up. And on top of that, we have 4 different Cazimis occurring this month with the main planets. One Cazimi on its own is already quite significant. You put 4 of them together though, and you have that clustered around equinox and also eclipse season. This is going to get wild. Okay, so the first Cazimi, this is when you have a planet conjunct the sun as viewed from Earth. That is on March 12th for Saturn at 22 degrees of Pisces. You'll notice that's right before that total lunar eclipse on the 14th. And then on March 20th, you have Neptune conjunct the sun at 29 degrees of Pisces, the very final critical degree of Pisces and of the entire zodiac. And Neptune will shift into Aries, the beginning of the zodiac, if you use Western tropical astrology, on the 30th of March. That's the first time it'll have been in Aries since 1861, which, guess what? That's when we had the American Civil War. So it's been 164 years since Neptune has had a reset of its zodiac position and overall of its energies there. We had this Cazimi occur right before at 29 degrees of Pisces, that critical degree of not only Pisces, but the entire zodiac. That's on the 20th. That's one day before the equinox. And then 2 and 3 days afterwards, we have the Venus and then the Mercury Cazimis, and this will be occurring at 2 degrees and 4 degrees of Aries respectively. And because these two are occurring so close together, that is signifying some pretty critical planetary geometry that we're having right around that time. I'm going to go in depth on that in just a second, but first and foremost, these are because Venus and Mercury are both retrograde. And so we had Venus retrograde start on March 1st, and we saw all this increased volatility in the cryptocurrency market right at that time. Also, we saw that big shouting match in the Oval Office right as Venus was stationing retrograde. Well, Mercury will be joining Venus in a retrograde. They're both covering through the same part of the sky. Mercury retrograde will finish before, but in general, they're basically happening at the same time, and they'll both be Cazimi the Sun around March 23rd, 24th. So let's check out that critical planetary geometry. Typically, it's seen that during a retrograde, the energies and archetypes associated with a specific planet will go haywire. So with a Venus retrograde, you can expect disruptions to love and relationships, and also, for example, your friendships, even your money and your finances. Those are all things that are governed by Venus. And during a Mercury retrograde, we can expect disruptions to communication and travel and trade. So all those combining together in March is one of these big disruptive factors that's going to play out on the world stage. Again, we're already seeing that occur. But what is also occurring from March 23rd to 25th is some very critical planetary geometry. And I think this is more specific towards, let's say, a very big geomagnetic disturbance. There's some research that was done by J.H. Nelson as outlined throughout his career and in his book Cosmic Patterns, released in 1974, which shows that certain planetary geometries and critical angles are connected to geomagnetic disturbances. Now, I will say a caveat right at the beginning was that his research was done back in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, and no one's really kind of taken up the mantle since then. But I finished reading his book, and I plotted a chart for the 23rd to 25th, right around that time, to see what this sort of planetary geometry was looking like, because I knew that Mercury and Venus were going to be basically conjunct together, and that already is a critical geometry. But when I pulled up the chart, holy cow, this is insane. He showed different planetary geometries as connected to severe geomagnetic disturbances that occurred throughout his time as a space weather forecaster. And he outlined some of the different configurations that were really kind of necessary to precipitate these really strong geomagnetic disturbances. And so this is just me outlining what's occurring. I'm not giving you a 100% prediction on this, but I think what he wrote was very compelling, and so we should look at this and just break this down. First and foremost, here is Mercury. There is Venus, here is the Earth, and there is the Moon. In a heliocentric chart, you're always going to have the Earth and the Moon together, right? And you can kind of ignore, in many ways, the zodiac and stuff. We're really just looking at the planetary geometries here. So we have all of these conjunct together. We have 3 inner planets conjunct together. Mercury is going to be sweeping through that Earth-Venus conjunction there on the 23rd, 24th. And so we'll see it's at 0 degrees. It's going up. And so just a day later, it'll be at 8 degrees. And these planets here, the Earth and Venus, will be at 5 degrees. So it's going to move through pretty quickly. They are in opposition to Saturn and Neptune, who are conjunct together. That conjunction will go more exact later in the year, but they are very closely conjunct at this moment in time on the opposite side of the sun. Then squaring all these planets, 5 planets, squaring all of them is the biggest in our solar system, Jupiter, also the mediator between them. These are all inner planets, right? So they're all close to the sun, all within 1 AU. Saturn is 10 AU out. Neptune is 30 astronomical units out. Jupiter is at 5, and so it's acting as this kind of tension agent, this torque agent there, square to all of them. And you'll also notice that we have Pluto and Uranus engaging in some angles as well, very precisely. So Uranus and Pluto are trine this great conjunction between all these inner planets right there. They are trine each other, and they are sextile to the conjunction between Saturn and Neptune right there. So some really significant planetary geometries as we see in this chart right there. And here are some notes as jotted down from the book Cosmic Patterns by J.H. Nelson. Let's give this a read. Mercury is of major importance due to its proximity to the Sun and its greatest orbital velocity. In 90% of cases, Mercury is the trigger planet as it moves into a major pattern already set up by the other planets. So in this case, this would be the fact that Venus and the Earth are already conjunct in opposition to Saturn and Neptune, and they are then also square to Jupiter, and they're engaged in this trine to Pluto and Uranus. Only Mars basically isn't involved significantly with this planetary geometry. Generally, for severe storms, a fast inner planet executes a hard angle, either 0, 90 degrees, or 180 degrees, to a slow outer planet and is at the same time in a harmonic relationship with 2 to 3 other planets. Additionally, when 3 other planets are involved in a simultaneous 90 degree and 120 degree arrangement, the disturbance can be very severe. And that's exactly what we see. We see other planets engage in this relationship. This is the main relationship right here, this opposition between these 3 and these 2. And then we have 3 other planets engaged harmonically. We have Jupiter in this square, which is 90 degrees, and then we have Pluto and Uranus engaged in that 120 degree angle for this group and 60 degrees for this group. So just based off of what J.H. Nelson wrote in his book and shared through his research, which was very successful according to him and also according to the company that worked for RCA in predicting these sort of disturbances for shortwave radio communication, this is very significant. There's some sort of effect on the position of the planets with solar activity, and also he goes into further detail in outlining, for example, the nodal position of the planets. This is where the orbit of the planet, its nodes on that ecliptic plane, and then also their perihelion points and how that has an influence over the disturbance that could be caused by this planetary geometry. So if this was solar minimum, then we're not likely to see a disturbance. I mean, it's possible to get a big solar storm during solar minimum because you have just one oddball sunspot kind of produce something, but we're in solar maximum right now. And we've been seeing this uptrend on sunspots if you look at the long-term moving average. And so already March looks to be quite active, and with it just being solar maximum in general, we're predisposed to having more powerful solar activity. And then you have Equinox with the greater ionospheric volatility at that moment in time. You have the Russell-McLaren effect. Then you have all these other archetypally charged energies with the eclipses and with the Cazimis, and you have the retrogrades. And then you get this on top. And it's like, holy cow, what the heck is going to happen? We hope nothing really crazy happens, but I'm just giving you the energetic forecast, and it looks quite wild. Thanks so much for watching. Again, I've been your host, Stefan Burns, wishing all of you well, especially this month and next. April also looks to be quite wild based on a whole bunch of these different factors. We still have the Russell-McLaren effect in play in April, and then we have a lot of other energies also occurring in April as it relates to the planets and of course solar maximum. And so I'll keep you up to date every step of the way. If you subscribe to the channel, smash that like button. Also, again, you can use the code MARCHMADNESS for 5% off all my products at wildfreeorganic.com/store, which you can go to by clicking this box right here. Thank you so much. Hoping for the best, wishing all of you well, and I'll see you all very soon.